Привет, ребята. Я в лесу. Сегодня мы будем анализировать шаманов. Любите шаманов? Объясняю почему, кстати. Дело в том, что вы не поверите, но анализирующих христианство, буддизм, ислам непредвзято просто нет. Вот нет на земле таких людей. Потому что над нами торчат, длинное слово. Над нами находятся эти энергии этих всех. Христа, там, Кришны, Будды, Мухаммеда, там, и так далее. И чтобы судить конкретно и реально, и адекватно о них, надо быть сильнее, чем они. Или, по крайней мере, наравне с ними, но лучше сильнее. Вот. Вот такие, как я, например. Вот. Поэтому таких выступлений, как бы, чтобы оценили как бы адекватно вот христианство и самого Христа, как бы нету. Вот просто нет. Не только христианство, почти все религии. А вот о шаманах получается слегка, чтобы судили объективно. Что шаманы, у них боги как бы, ну как, не то, что у них тоже сложные боги. Солнце, что не сложный бог, все равно сложный, да? Но все равно шаманов уже как-то не боятся, их Грегор ослабел, очень сильно ослабел, потому что везде уже взято, все куплено, как говорят, да, все христиане, все буддисты, исламисты. И все-таки ученые пытаются судить объективно о шаманах, насколько можно, потому что надо быть специалистом по шаманизму. Надо быть специалистом. Сандра Ингерман есть одна шаманка хорошая из Америки. Сандра Ингерман. А у нас в Москве есть Алина Слободова. Алина Слободова. Красавица, кстати. Сандра Ингерман тоже красавица. Алинка блондинка, а Сандра темненькая. Так вот, еще там один гуру всех шаманов, забыл его фамилию, старею я. Он такой знаменитый. Короче, есть один, который написал книгу «Путь шамана». Забыл, вспомню. Вот он гуру всех шаманов. Ну как, он тоже, как, конечно, и, ну, у них слабые места какое. Они больше, чем надо обращать внимание на наркотики. То есть вот галлюциногены, там, ЛСД, это слабое у них. У шаманов в древности можно было, а у нас вместо галлюциногенного и ЛСД может быть все что угодно, и природа, и музыка. Ну, у нас 21 век, у нас возможность огромная для изменения состояния сознания. Ну, они, вот я послушал, там, кстати, огромное просто выступление, 2 часа этих шаманов. Я просто устаю от них слегка, конечно. Ну, причем древняя такая передача, 2009 год, 3 года назад. Все равно мне приятно. Там, короче, Терес Маккена есть, он умер, к сожалению. Но их там больше. И все они, конечно, ну, с моей точки зрения, нормально судят все-таки, да. Ну, как нормально? Нормально на фоне других. Потому что нормально судит, наверное, сам Господь Бог, которого нет. Вот. Так что, ребят, скоро мы к шаманам подадимся. Шаманы. Любите шаман? Шаман это вещь, блин, они по лесам шастали. Шаман был одновременно все. И духовный лидер, и целитель, и этот просто политический лидер. Просто руководитель племени, это же в племенах раньше было. Археологи нашли традиции шаманизма даже 30 тысяч лет назад, представляете? А говорят некоторые, что даже 100 тысяч. Ну тогда я не знаю, что там за люди были. Говорят, вообще 12 лет назад нашли, уже конкретно нашли, что 12 тысяч лет назад просто была Атлантида. Нашли конкретно там под землей, короче, нашли вот ихние эти гавани, то есть порты, как бы там, нашли примерно примерно 6 миллионов людей, значит, там, короче, да, вот, урбан шаман, оказывается, и в городах есть шаманы. Так, manifesting the mind, это будем про шаманов. Ладно. Ребят, вы будете слушать шаманов по-английски. Но это не шаманы, это ученые, которые исследуют шаманство. Конечно, большинство из них, конечно, немножко шаманы. Вот. Я вам расскажу, что такое шаман вообще. Многие даже об этом не знают. Да? Шаман — это целитель, маг, колдун, парапсихолог, медиум и все что угодно. И духовный лидер у примитивных людей. Ну, когда даже государства не были, были племена, да? И вот этот конгломерат того, что я сказал, осталось и в наше время. Что и в наше время есть примитивные люди. И в Сибири где-то, там в Африке, в Латинской Америке, там в Азии. Вот есть шаманы. И причем у них оказалось, что они вообще чудеса делают, исцеляют, вызывают дождь. Вообще, ну то есть, замечательные такие ребята. Исцеляют рак, СПИД. Самое интересное, они меняют судьбу человека, да? То есть они меняют, значит, событийный уровень событий, да? Карму получают. Вообще чудеса делают. Но они, конечно, чудаки. Они могут в трансе быть, полуживые, полумертвые, могут кричать, могут с ума сходить, и бить даже палкой вас, если вы случайно где-то рядом там. Короче, ждите от них все, что угодно, но в целом они хорошие. Но самое приятное, конечно, то, что они когда дождь вызывали, это вообще дождик, шаман. Я сам немножко шаман, видите, я сейчас в лесу. Сам факт, что я чувствую энергию, разве это не шаманство? Конечно, я руковожу как могу этой энергией, но у меня как бы миссия другая. Все-таки духовный лидер, я должен религию новую. Итак, ребята, начинаются речи. Может, покажу вам немножко их. Наверное, лес лучше. Какие-то головы этих выступающих. Лес же красивее, правильно? Так что, наверное, ограничимся голосом и лесом, да? Вникайте. Может, и вы станете шаманами. Мы все слегка шаманы. Все. Итак, вы, скорее всего, будете на моей голове. Вот прямо здесь на лбу. Прямо на лбу я поставлю два этих мобильника. Один снимает, другой говорит. Значит, я буду поворачивать так голову, вот так и вы будете видеть природу молдавскую. Лес, да? Может быть, здесь не видно, понимаете, темно здесь. Чтобы давать яркость, надо остановить, а не хочется. Короче, все. Идем. Начинается эпопея под названием «Становимся шаманами». Шаманами, да.
Sometimes self-flagellation or sometimes, different types of physical stress. But the basic idea of shamanism is to achieve an altered state of consciousness, and not simply to have the experience. The shaman actually uses the altered state to access a transpersonal realm, a realm of spirits or supernatural forces, which can maybe allies of some kind, which he or she can manipulate, communicate with, obtain information from, to help their community or an individual.
Shamans are medicine men, I guess, in Western parlance. And so shamanism is what shamans do. They beat drums, they take drugs, they dance, and they cure people, or they attempt to cure people. They interpret dreams, they find lost objects.
It harkens back to a time when things like psychotherapy and medicine and magic and religion and all of these things weren't even, fully formed concepts. So the shaman kind of combines all of these roles of he's a priest and a doctor and a psychotherapist and also often a poet and an artist and someone that gives expression to the cultural,
and I keep saying he, and that's, it should be clear there are shamanesses as well, or women shaman. It's not a gender-specific kind of thing. But the figure of the shaman is a, important spiritual figure in these non-traditional societies, in these traditional societies, in these indigenous societies. Respected and a little bit feared, because the shaman is the odd person. The shaman is the person who is in direct contact with the transpersonal and is kind of the interface for the culture and the rest of the people. He or she is the person that gets to actually dialogue and travel in these realms, and they often use psychotropic plants to do this. Not invariably, but quite often. It's quite clear that different kinds of hallucinogenic plants and substances were used, including from the bufo toad. Peter first did some examination of this among the Olmec people. So this is before the classic Maya civilization, back around 1200 BC. And the bufo toad can be kind of a 5-MeO-DMT can be extracted from the glands on the shoulder of the toad.
There's another compound out there called bufotenine, which was first discovered in frog skin, actually, and it's got some kind of psychoactivity. It's a little hard to really pin that down. But it's a naturally occurring, tryptamine as well, though. It's found in blood and brain and cerebrospinal fluid and urine, any body fluid in animals in which it's been looked for.
So they were clearly using psilocybin mushrooms. They were clearly using the 5-MeO-DMT extracted from the bufo toad, and possibly a more close analog of DMT itself. I mean, there's some discussion around the difference between 5-MeO-DMT and regular DMT, but actually modern explorers with these substances have reported that there are qualitatively different experiences, but both can be pretty soul-shaking. So I think within this context, then, you had a whole array of other hallucinogenic plants being used, the morning glory. The Mazatec Indians today, when Gordon Wasson visited the Mazatec and Mixe regions of Oaxaca in the 1950s, it started this whole revolution in understanding the scope and the depth of the sacred plants that were being used. So you have Salvia divinorum, for example, is a plant that was used by the Mazatec Indians, and is still used today. That's also where the sacred mushroom cult, psilocybin mushroom cult, was rediscovered. A place where the sacred mushroom cult apparently survived up until modern times.
Part of the fear that society at large has of psychedelic drugs is that the only framework that we have to process these experiences through in Western culture is that of competitive drinking. Competitive drinking is sort of the standard that we use to measure what it's like to alter consciousness. And I think the shamanistic perspective or shamanistic worldview can give us a new perspective on how to process these experiences and show how valuable that they can be. The shamanic perspective essentially would say that drugs are not the ideal way to alter your consciousness, and you shouldn't alter your consciousness with any of these types of substances until you at least first master altering your consciousness through other means, such as the use of drums, dancing, paying attention to your dreams.
There's all sorts of different ways of attaining altered states, through plants and drugs, through trance, meditation, hypnosis, drumming, starvation, fasting, unexhaustive exercise, all kinds of things. And in terms of an entheogen, what I would define as an entheogen, I'm not fond of the term because it kind of requires that you have a belief in theos, which is God or divinity. that the term psychedelic is just a bit more descriptive of what these drugs or plants, do or what they manifest. The psychedelic means, mind manifesting. And, one could argue that the phenomena one encounters on a psychedelic drug experience are either internally generated or are externally independent and freestanding. I think it still kind of dispenses with theological problems that are accompanied by calling a drug something that generates, divinity within, if you don't believe in divinity.
It means God within, generating God within, and inside theos, God, and generate, so that which generates God inside a person. So, and it's a class of drugs, formerly called psychedelic, but it's a way of sort of softening the bad press of the word psychedelic. And especially it's to separate it from sort of the party aspect of taking the drug and going crazy, and showing that these drugs have a spiritual side to them, if you can find it.
A term that I prefer is shamanic plant or shamanic medicine, because it's a plant, a psychoactive plant, usually a psychedelic or a hallucinogen, that is used in one of these shamanic traditions, right? So it's appropriate to call it a shamanic medicine, although the very same plant and the very same substance could be not shamanic if you're not using it in a shamanic context. If you're using it recreationally or taking it in a rave or some other situation, it's not really a shamanic medicine anymore. It's still the same substance, but if you're talking about substances that are used specifically sort of in this shamanic context, then I like shamanic medicine. I have problems with the term entheogen, although I know that it's gotten more popular after Carl Ruck, who was a classicist, and Jonathan Ott and some other people proposed it as an alternative to hallucinogen. Entheogen means manifesting the God within, in theos, within and God. And that's fine, except they don't always do that.
I don't like the word because I'm a Buddhist and I don't believe in gods. So it's to me it's something which helps you to reach your full potential. You don't need to introduce the idea of God. I like the term because I have turned very mystical, since taking LSD. And so my outlook is more skewed in that direction. I think that what Groff said was that it was a non-specific amplifier of your mental states. The psychedelic or hallucinogen or fantastica, the psychotomimetic, all of these qualities that have been ascribed to the same class of sacraments that we now refer to as entheogens. I think it's closer for me to the ultimate purpose for which these substances can be used. The capacity for the human being to experience infinite love and total self-forgiveness.
Infinite love, бесконечная любовь, прям как в моей религии. Но есть ощущение, что этот смартфончик заглох. Что ж ты, меня подводишь? Infinite love. Love. Бесконечная любовь. Господа, вы верите, что есть бесконечная любовь? И не только любовь. Бесконечная мудрость. Бесконечное милосердие. Хотите бесконечного милосердия? Бесконечное милосердие, да. Бесконечная любвеобильность. Бесконечная доброта. А, бесконечное сопереживание, вот. Бесконечная помощь. Бескорыстная бесконечная помощь. Хотите такое? Бескорыстная бесконечная помощь. Бескорыстное бесконечное самопожертвование ради вас. Хотите вот такое? А ведь можно все, можно даже такое. Бескорыстное бесконечное самопожертвование. Ради вас. Можно все, блин. Что такое религия? Что такое новая религия? Что такое я? Это же можно все. Я же, блин, пытаюсь вам внушить, что можно вообще все. Конечно, все хорошее. Плохое нам не надо. Если можно все, то берем все хорошее из этого, что можно все. Да. Перед нами железная дорога Кишинев-Москва. Я тут в лесу, блин, шаман. Но мы возвращаемся к нашим шаманам. Почему ты заглох, смартфон? Почему ты меня, блин, в самый ответственный момент кидаешь, а? Нельзя так. Нельзя кидать. Это несерьезно. Будем дальше анализировать шаманов. И. Что такое? Продолжается наша шаманская эпопея. Шаманы — это люди редкие, необычные. Особая судьба у них. Я когда был в Москве и учился всем этим делам, там даже было, я помню, такая вещь, как говорили, что чтобы стать шаманом, нужно несчастье по жизни. Много несчастья нужно. Тогда становится, значит, гибкая подсознательные структуры как бы раскачиваются, да, и ты становишься как бы парапсихолог, экстрасенс, просто чувствующим сильно, просто динамично развивающимся и так далее. Я, конечно, так не считаю. Я считаю, что жизнь и так нас подбрасывает много несчастий. Не надо их специально вызвать. Но все равно.
You take this psychedelic, you're going to have funny ideas. And funny ideas are very dangerous, especially if they don't fit in with, what we're saying should be, kind of the accepted cultural zeitgeist. So that's the danger of psychedelics, is they actually cause people to question the cultural paradigms and say, well, maybe this is not consistent with, maybe the revelations of psychedelics are not consistent with what Hollywood and Wall Street and the government and Main Street and, religions and all these institutions are dishing out.
So the war on drugs is really a war on consciousness and who's allowed to think what. More importantly, I personally don't believe that anybody has the right to tell you what to do with your own body or what thoughts that you can think. That if you do not have the freedom to decide what happens to your own body and your own mind, then you really don't have freedom at its most basic, essential level.
I think it's really ridiculous that they won't allow terminal cancer patients to take whatever fucking drug they want. I mean, you can't argue it's going to be dick. He's going to die anyway. Why can't you take any drug you like? And the extension of that is once you pass a certain age, I don't know quite what that age should be, you should be able to do anything you fucking want to your body without being prosecuted. So scientists and old people should have free access to any drugs they want. I think I qualify in both counts. So, but our society, I don't even think that's enlightened. I think that's common sense. An enlightened society would take a look at these drugs objectively and say which ones can help, promote, and do we want a society based on alcohol and cocaine, or do you want a society based on LSD, MDMA, ayahuasca? Which of the drugs we're going to promote? And our society's picked, for some reason, the absolute worst drugs to make as its standards.
potentially psychedelic drugs could be for psychology what the telescope became for the science of astronomy.
In the right set and setting, with the right kind of psychotherapy support or religious support or whatever the context of the support is, and most importantly what the person's intention is when they take it. If they're an addict or an alcoholic, they can take ayahuasca, they can take peyote, they can take these substances, and it will definitely help them to get over that. And in the case of something like ibogaine, it's even more specific. I mean, there's other things going on with ibogaine that might interrupt the addiction syndrome on the physical level.
For many people, actually, who were alcoholics and things like that, many have been cured by their use of psychedelics. So in some ways, it's the opposite of addiction.
Entheogens actually are almost the opposite of an addicting drug, in that sometimes a person will only take an entheogen once and have a very powerful experience and actually be freed from some other addictions or habits that he or she might have. And in fact, in some ibogaine research, an African drug called ibogaine, people are being taken off of heroin and alcohol with some good success, where other methods have failed.
I discovered ibogaine pretty much 11 years ago on the internet back home to a friend of mine, which I gave a treatment. It was in heroin. He was heroin addicted, so I treat him with the root, because I never use ibogaine for detox. No, I always use straight root. So when he went back to his country, that's how he learned about ibogaine, and he sent me an email. I'm like, whoa, that's very interesting. So ibogaine is an extraction from iboga. So he takes the root itself, he did extraction, and it became the first total alkaloid.
Now, ibogaine is very effective at treating certain kinds of addiction, opiates, methamphetamines, cocaine, and alcohol.
Ibogaine has 5 different therapies that we basically became aware in their use. One is an initiatory aspect, which is the psychospiritual, where you get into the deepening dreaming aspects. You have no active addiction in the body. The second is for physical healing, things like herpes, asthma, lung problems, blocked energies in the system, scar tissue. Then there's also a mental treatment for disabilities around depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, trauma, sexual abuse. Then there's a reset therapy that we do with alcohol, cocaine, and methamphetamine. We separate that because those substances need to be out of the body for 24 to 72 hours prior to treatment. And then there's opiate. And an opiate detox, we can begin 12 hours after last administering of an opiate, and within 45 minutes it will completely control any symptoms of withdrawals. I even do the healing for, let's say, for women who is wanting to have kids, and let's say they try in hospital, and the doctor say, you can't have kids anymore. But the woman is normal. It's like nothing is missing in her tummy. Why she can't have kids? I do the healing of that, Iboga.
Something that's been discovered recently by Dr. Deborah Mash and others is that there is a new neurotransmitter created in the brain after taking ibogaine called noribogaine. And it can stay in your system for up to 4 months. And that's the substance that they theorize is continually working on your psyche to make that reduction of cravings stay in place, so that over the long term, you have time to break out of that cycle of addiction and become a new person.
Not only is it address the symptoms of withdrawals and discomfort, but it also works in the craving center of the mind. So the individual, by the time they've completed treatment, has no desire whatsoever within a 10 days to 2 week period to touch opiates.
See, that's pretty much the reason why I'm here in the West. I didn't just decide to come here. I love my country and we really peaceful there. Life's also great like here in Mexico. I would not just leave my people, whatever I was doing, my family, just to come here to hang out. No, I had a call from the Spirit to spread the roots, the word of the word, Boga, which is I'm talking with Abigail, to spread in the world, because it's not just for Africans, it's for anybody who needs it. If it was just up to me, I would just okay, let's go from city to city, clean up the streets, clean up the houses. We're going to find those guys with drug addicts. We're going to find them and heal them all. Because that's the only way. That Iboga and Abogen is a last call for anybody who really wants to get help. You don't have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars or spend months in a clinic rehab and go back tomorrow and using the drugs. No, it takes just a couple days to get it, and I'm ready to do that. To help anybody who wants to take it. Just one decision. That's it. That's all it takes.
But the thing is, I've also known many people who take a lot of psychedelics and they're heroin addicts, they're alcoholics. It hasn't helped them a bit. So, honesty behooves me to say that. This is not a miracle cure for addiction. All these things can do is open up an opportunity for the person to examine their lives and resolve to change if that's what they want to do. But it won't compel them to change. It's not going to force anybody off drugs. It's like a lot of other techniques for treating addiction, talk therapy or whatever. They work in some people and not in other people.
Since it's illegal in the United States, the only options that an addict has is to go out of the country or to do it illegally in the United States. And there are some people in the United States who are treating addicts illegally. They're breaking the law by healing these people. However, most people go to other countries to take Ibogaine. I personally went to Mexico around the Puerto Vallarta area with an organization called AwakeningInTheDream.com. And that was a great experience for me. And the people there were super nice, and it was in a setting that I think was beneficial to the Ibogaine experience. In other words, it wasn't in a clinic, it was in a house, and I was with people who were very experienced at doing this, and I felt completely safe. But there are several clinics in Mexico doing this. Some of them are just right across the border in Tijuana.
And there's lots of clinics around the world that will take your money and give you Ibogaine. They've never taken Ibogaine. They don't know anything about drug addiction, and they have no idea what that individual is going through in that process. And that just frightens the hell out of me. I mean, in comparison to what the model in the United States, this is not a return visit, a revolving door therapy house. We're hoping you can come here once, get rid of that addiction, and when you come back again to do more work with the Ibogaine, if it benefited you, without an addiction in the body, because then you can go to the next level, and then you work to the next level. And this could be a real supportive, this isn't like going to meetings every day and believing that you're never going to be anything less than what you are. This confirms that you are no longer in the body energetically. There is no physical addiction existing in the system.
It enables them to release from the addictive need, actually. They found themselves after their trips without the desire for junk.
and they were all shocked, you know, like, oh my God, this is a, you know, because they were like waiting for the.
Итак, видимо, это кармически. Значит, что такое кармически? Это значит предназначено судьбой. Чтобы остановился смартфончик. Наверное, это для моих комментариев. Вы знаете, когда он приближается к тому, чтобы остановиться, я автоматически, значит, чувствую изменение энергии. Конечно, тут добавляется ваша энергия из будущего. Итак, мои хорошие, мы там слушаем, насколько я понимаю я 5%, а может 10%, что там очень много говорят они о психоделиках. И, видимо, это где-то оправдано. Вся наша жизнь это один большой психоделик, я так думаю. Вся наша жизнь это один большой огромный психоделик. Вся наша жизнь это сплошная медитация. Вся наша жизнь это... Вы, наверное, уже поняли, что вы должны богами быть в этой жизни-то. Иначе грош нам цена. Да, богами нам надо быть, господа, богами. Никуда нам не деться. Ну что, продолжается эпопея под названием «Шаманы». Шаманы нас учат жить, или мы их. Идет же 50/50. Ладно, в любом случае продолжается шаманское это дело. Несмотря на то, что я русский парень, и вы хотите мои комментарии по-русски, мы будем купаться в вибрации.
Maybe you were going to face some of the shadows that has been part of your addictive process.
This really sort of crosses over into the shamanic use of these things. I mean, the shaman is a person who learns through discipline to navigate in these realms. And this is the realm of, you know, he learns to pass through both ways, through the doors that the dead pass daily. I think that high doses of psychedelics or something like DMT is very close, probably. I mean, I've never had a near-death experience. I hope never to have one until I'm actually dying, you know. But people who have had them say that they're very similar to high doses of DMT. And there's even reason to think that the DMT, which our own bodies make, may be involved in the near-death experience. That, you know, in the state of stress on the mind and body that is produced when you're dying, it's not inconceivable that your brain releases a massive flood of DMT and you have this experience.
But all this still is mostly within the realm of speculation. We still don't really know enough about the normal concentrations of DMT in the body and what situations increase it in and what sorts of conditions the levels are decreased.
Where is DMT found in nature? Well, a better question would be where is it not found in nature? I mean, this is really interesting to me. The fact that DMT is so ubiquitous in nature, and it's part. It is from the chemical standpoint, structurally, it's the simplest of the psychedelics. It's a very, very simple compound. And in terms of biochemistry, it's only 2 steps away from tryptophan. Tryptophan is an amino acid. It's one of the essential amino acids. So it is universal. All living things have tryptophan. Now, not all living things have DMT, probably, but the enzymes that convert tryptophan to DMT, there are 2 main enzymes in this process, are also universal. I mean, I don't know how chemical we want to get here, but the basic idea is that there's an enzyme that takes off the acid group of the amino acid, so it turns it from an amino acid into an amine. And then there's another enzyme that puts methyl groups onto the amine. So first you get tryptophan, and then you get tryptamine, and then you get dimethyltryptamine, which is what DMT is. And this goes on, I think, very commonly. These enzymes are certainly common. I mean, they're common in all cells, practically. Do all organisms contain DMT? I think it's possible that all organisms might contain traces of DMT. There are many plants that contain DMT. We know of at least a couple hundred, and that's only because we've looked. There are probably thousands of plants. In fact, my suspicion is that because tryptophan is so easily converted to DMT, I think if you went out with a sufficiently sensitive instrument, mass spectrometer or whatever, and just started sampling plants at random and shoving those through your gas chromatograph or whatever you're using, you would find traces of DMT in every plant. And you would also find it, we know it's very widespread in animals too. So we know it's in amphibians, we know it's in mammals, including us. We know it's in marine organisms, we know it's in fish. So it's odd that, maybe it's not odd. It's just a fact of nature that it's all over the place. And probably is about as close to being universal as anything is.
It's also related to serotonin. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter which occurs in all life and is most concentrated in the higher primates and most concentrated there in man. It is 5-hydroxytryptamine, while DMT is, as you mentioned, N,N-dimethyltryptamine. So there is a very close structural affinity between this extremely potent and exotic hallucinogen and the very common basis for ordinary consciousness, serotonin.
DMT and 5-methoxy-DMT and even beta-carbolines, which are the other component of the ayahuasca combination, do occur in the human brain, and they occur in other places in the human body, in the adrenal glands, for instance, probably in the gut. But they definitely occur in the human brain, especially in the pineal gland.
Стоп. Короче, они больше, чем надо, обращают внимание на всякие, химикаты, там, ДНД, там, стриптотин. Вы прекрасно знаете, что по моей религии вся наша жизнь — это сплошная медитация, сплошной галлюциноген, но самое интересное, что мы сами можем избрать какой-то вид деятельности, где мы развиваемся удачно, решаем свои проблемы и вообще все окей. То есть, вместо стриптоцина, ДНД может быть музыка, художество, рисуете там, вы поэты, писатели, пошли на природу, вот как я, еще что-нибудь. Ну ладно, в любом случае продолжим это дело. Продолжим, конечно, куда мы денемся сейчас. Нам никуда не деться от них сегодня. У нас такая карма, надо с ними повозиться, с шаманами, с учеными, которые исследуют шаманизм. Они, кстати, мировые ученые. Значит, что это передача лидер по этим вопросам. И ученые самые такие знаменитые. Просто я как бы не вхожу прямо, кто они там по фамилии и так далее. Ну, я так, если я, значит, поставил это дело, значит, стоит. Значит, стоит.
Maybe that early Christianity had, aspects of the mushroom cults, that may have appeared in these artworks, which definitely are, some of them really are very suggestive of mushrooms.
Грибам, ладно. Послушаем про грибов. Машрум.
However, I think that sometimes there's a tendency in the psychedelic community to almost become like, entheogenic fundamentalists and think that all visionary experience, was mediated by the psychedelic plants, and that the origin of all religions was based in, the experience of using these substances. And it may be the case, we just don't know. And it may not be the case, because people have visionary experiences, without psychedelics. I mean, diet, fasting, drumming, there are all sorts, there's a whole range, yoga, there's a whole range of types of experiences that produce mystical visions, sense of unity with the cosmos. So I'm a little resistant to a strain that I often encounter in the psychedelic underground of kind of fundamentalism around these experiences, that they were the origin of all genuine religion or whatever. So, but they probably played more of a part than the official story gives credit to.
When religions come in contact with a real mystery, with a really numinous thing, they don't like that, because numinous things are inherently dangerous and threatening, and a lot of religion has to do with controlling people. And, there needs to be a distance between God or the numinous archetype, whatever that is, and the people. And that's usually the priestly hierarchy and the infrastructure around that, and the sort of infrastructure that filters the message.
One of the things that stood out in my research in Christianity was the use of the Eucharist. That is, going back to the Last Supper and Jesus' purported words at the time when he dipped the bread and said, "This is my body. Eat it and have life in you. Unless you eat this, you will not have life in you. This is my blood," and he handed the cup of supposed wine and said, "This is my blood, and unless you drink this blood, you will not have life in you. Unless you eat my body and drink my blood, you will not have life in you." And this is stressed over and over, especially in John, the book of John, the New Testament. So what could this mean? Is this all mere symbol? Why degrade, ostensibly degrade a high spiritual experience by likening it to eating the flesh and blood of another human being? That seems counterintuitive and completely beside the point, unless these were symbols for something else, for another substance.
The Christian Eucharist promises a lot and delivers very little in terms of, in other words, you have to believe to get much out of the Christian Eucharist. And if you believe, then you may get, you won't get a psychedelic experience, but you will get something, an affirmation of faith or a feeling that you're, in communication with the Creator. Frankly, to be honest, I don't believe. I was raised Catholic, but it never made any sense to me, and so I don't believe, so I can't really tell you what a devout Christian gets from the Eucharist. What's different about psychedelics is they do deliver something, they deliver an experience if they're taken in the right set and setting, and I think one of the main things that sets them aside from, or that distinguishes them from the Eucharist is you don't have to believe. In fact, I tell people faith is not necessary, to experience what psychedelics have to teach. In fact, that's an impediment. Get rid of your faith. Approach it like a scientist, You don't have to believe. You can be as skeptical as you want. You can take the substance in, you can experience it, and you can make your own judgments what it's about.
If Paul and other people are eating the body of the God and having an incredible visionary, Paul says, again, just completely contradicts the idea of a historical Jesus, because he says, everything I know about Jesus came to me by revelation. Where's this coming from? What is the source of his experiences? I wouldn't be at all surprised. I mean, a chap called John Allegro many years ago wrote a book, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, which was about precisely this. He believes that the cultic meal of sharing was people getting together and eating some psychoactive substance together and having revelations of the Holy Spirit, what have you. So I'm open to any investigations and whatever evidence comes up. You know, I think it's, through personal experience myself, one of the most powerful ways to, well, Aldous Huxley himself, when in is it Heaven and Hell? Door's Perception. When he looks at the bamboo chair, I think it is, and he says, I suddenly, and this is a man who spent his entire life writing about the religious traditions of the world, the mystical traditions of the world, but he never actually had an experience. And here he was on mescaline, I believe, and looking at his chair, suffused with light, and he says, here all these words that people have used before, like grace and all these mystical, suddenly I was having that experience. Alan Watts the same, again a great scholar, actually had the experience in this way. So if that's happening to people today, I think we can safely assume it's been happening to people for a very, very long time. Yeah.
Shamanism is like a universal human dispensation wherever people live in connection with their native land, and it doesn't have to be through plants either. I mean, there are tribes that don't use plants, that just do all-night ceremonies, ritualistic drumming. There are all sorts of different ways to get people into altered states, and actually we're learning more and more about brainwave patterns and theta states and alpha states and so on. So and I think that's as Andrew Weil talks about, the desire, the sort of almost the necessity for people to change their consciousness and experience other states of consciousness seems to be very basic to our human nature. And if people aren't given constructive and creative outlets for those types of experience, they'll choose destructive and negative ones, just because it's just almost natural that we would want to have different types of consciousness experience.
Anybody's experience, their subjective personal experience of the mystical, has to be considered valid in some respect. They may have a different deterministic screen, a set of words that they use to describe these mystical experiences, and maybe sometimes we don't always agree with those because of the baggage that's associated with them, but we still have to be open to the truth from those experiences before we completely just throw the baby out with the bathwater.
A mystical experience by any means whatsoever, and if you can do Sufi dancing and attain a state of mystic bliss by finding your center and being a vortex, like a gyroscope of being, I think there are numerous ways that people sort of align themselves with this mystic reality, but I happen to think that entheogens and psychedelics are a powerful way that could more safely be integrated into sort of initiatory experiences that people call into their lives and stuff. And I think that the usefulness of the substances may eventually, if humanity can evolve itself and mature itself, there may be an application in the future for these substances.
And it's that ability to take what works and leave behind. That's what the evolution of culture is. But you don't abandon the past, all the beautiful music and the buildings and the traditions. We just see it differently.
When the Spanish Inquisition got to the New World and they found these Aztecs, eating mushrooms and having a jolly old time and having these ecstatic experiences and all that. I mean, as if that wasn't bad enough, but then they were calling it the flesh of the gods. Teonanacatl was the Aztec term for the mushrooms, which meant flesh of the gods. And this just enraged the clerics, and they just, this was like so blasphemous, it couldn't be tolerated. And so they really, reacted more brutally than they might have otherwise reacted to try to suppress this thing, because they just couldn't have this kind of thing. The parallels were too striking, and their Eucharist didn't do much, and the Aztec Eucharist, delivered big time. So that was another reason why it had to be suppressed.
With the communion, where you take the wine and the bread, it works with people because it's done in a ritual context. People do have profound experiences, but I think very often, certainly over time, it's a bit of a letdown, really. What is probably the case originally is that the wine would have been suffused with something, and also that the bread itself, there's a psychedelic fungi.
Well, that's where LSD is synthesized from ergot of rye.
Yeah.
And they believe that at certain points when the bread was...
Итак, господа, уже стало традицией, что наш смартфон останавливается. Ничего. Вы прекрасно понимаете, вы достаточно продвинутый и умный, чтобы понять, что ничего не бывает случайно. Ничего не бывает случайно. То есть, когда этот смартфон был сделан в Китае, инженеры уже взаимодействовали с событиями, которые сейчас происходят с нами здесь в лесу. Что мы слушаем этих ученых, которые о шаманах рассуждают, да? Это очень высокий уровень высшей магии, который мало кто признает, но она есть. И от того, что ее не признает, это не означает, что ее нету и она не работает. Влияние из далекого будущего на настоящее. Но мне понравится здесь. Значит, наконец-то они поговорили о религии, о том, как влияют психоделики, всякие там травы, всякие грибы на религиозно-мистический опыт. Вообще начинают они немножко получше. Давай, друг. Покажи, что ты умный.
With those because of the baggage that's associated with them. But we still have to be open to the truth from those experiences before we completely just throw the baby out with the bathwater.
A mystical experience by any means whatsoever, and if you can do Sufi dancing and attain a state of mystic bliss by finding your center and being a vortex, like a gyroscope of being, I think there are numerous ways that people sort of align themselves with this mystic reality. But I happen to think that entheogens and psychedelics are a powerful way that could more safely be integrated into, the sort of initiatory experiences that people call into their lives and stuff. And I think that the usefulness of the substances may eventually, if humanity can evolve itself and mature itself, there may be an application in the future for these substances.
And it's that ability to take what works and leave behind. That's what the evolution of culture is. But you don't abandon the past, all the beautiful music and the buildings and the traditions. We just see it differently.
when the Spanish Inquisition got to the New World and they found these Aztecs, eating mushrooms and having a jolly old time and having these ecstatic experiences and all that. I mean, as if that wasn't bad enough, but then they were calling it the flesh of the gods. Teonanacatl was the Aztec term for the mushrooms, which meant flesh of the gods. And this just enraged the clerics, and they just, this was like so blasphemous, it couldn't be tolerated. And so they really, reacted more brutally than they might have otherwise reacted to try to suppress this thing, because, they just couldn't have this kind of thing. The parallels were too striking. And their Eucharist didn't do much, and the Aztec Eucharist, delivered big time. So that was another reason why it had to be suppressed.
With the communion, where you take the wine and the bread, it works for people because it's done in a ritual context. People do have profound experiences, but I think very often, certainly over time, it's a bit of a letdown, really. What is probably the case originally is that the wine would have been suffused with something, and also that the bread itself, there's a psychedelic foam.
Well, that's where LSD is synthesized from ergot of rye.
Yeah.
And they believe that at certain points, when the bread was infected, and the medieval St. Vitus dance, for example, if the fungus has attacked the crop before it's turned into bread, the bread itself becomes psychedelic. And there were many eruptions in the Middle Ages, in particularly damp summers, when the ergot would flourish, when people would go kind of crazy.
If Jesus, say, were a shaman or a hierophant, which in the Greek term is what he was, a revealer of the mysteries, and he had a mystery, he said, I have a mystery, and he reveals his mystery to whom he chooses. Well, so he acted like a shaman, and perhaps even a higher stage higher than a shaman, because shamans aren't necessarily spiritual, in my understanding, and often aren't. But Jesus' mission was intensely spiritual, and he wanted to take people to heaven, because he said, where I go, you will go also. The things I do, you will do also, and greater things even than I do. So, the fact that you could take this mushroom, this flesh and blood-like mushroom, and ascend to a heaven of light and love and bliss makes a very literal connection for me to Christianity and to this secret message that I think Jesus was handing out, not to the masses, but to the inner circle.
And this is the problem with the ancient pagan mysteries in general. They were mysteries. Everybody who participated was sworn to secrecy. And what's incredible, that the mysteries of Eleusis were celebrated for 1,000 years in the Greek world. Many people, Roman emperors, Cicero, Seneca, all the greats, were initiates. None of them broke their oath and told us what happened. But we know that initiates drank a drink before they began on the sacred way to Eleusis, which was a painful purgatorial process. They were beaten by people with rods. It was meant to be a visceral, physical experience, and I feel it was certainly heightened by fasting. So if they did take anything then, we know that would have been intensified, because it always is when you fast beforehand. Archaeologists have found opium pipes at Eleusis, so we've got enough hints to know. And the ancients were master pharmacopists. They knew all of the intoxicating, and as Tim says, came out of the shamanic tradition.
In the heart of the Greek mysteries, the cradle of Western civilization, there was the Eleusinian mystery cult, and you had the enactment of I guess Demeter and Persephone and all this going into the underworld, and then at the height of this maybe 6-day ceremony or something, they took a psychedelic, which they call the kykion.
There is an illustration. It's used on Robert Graves' Greek myths, which is one Maenad who are the female followers of Dionysus holding up a mushroom.
Yeah.
So there are numerous hints that this was going on. I wouldn't be at all surprised. I'd go further. I'd say I'd be surprised if it wasn't true. Yeah. What we can't say, and the reason that Peter and I haven't pushed it in our research, is because if you're coming out and saying that Jesus doesn't exist, it's such a confronting thing for most people that we've tried to keep to everything we can absolutely meticulously back up. But here is another possibility which others have looked into much more deeply than we have, and yet really, it would be such a surprise to see such a powerfully transformative process going on that didn't draw on this in some way, because they didn't have the same taboos which we've now got around changing consciousness.
Yeah. And now you can look at Socrates' whole allegory of the cave and things like that, and you can, where people were just being in their cave and noticing the shadows and thinking that was the world, and then somebody turned around and they went outside and they saw the sun, and it's like, oh my God. He came back and wanted to tell all of his friends about it, and they absolutely wouldn't look toward the light, no matter what he did. They just wanted to stay entranced in their shadow world.
We are in this cave, we are watching shadows on the wall and mistaking them for reality, whilst the true source of light is from the mouth of the cave. And Plato even says, what would happen if a wise person came from the sunlight into the cave and said to people, look, you're just looking at shadows, this is not the real world. And then he says they would probably kill him.
So they say basically that's what happens with the mystic, and they've seen the light in a sense, and they're trying to tell their brothers and sisters, about the reality of their own sort of higher dimensions.
The way to understand religion is you've gone from a powerfully transformative event where you would take these psychoactives in a ritual context, probably alongside some sort of ritual death, and your state of consciousness utterly transformed. Yeah. To a little bit of white wafer and some tiny sip of wine in a context where you're going to go back and sing. But I think it must always be the function of organized religion to neuter, to emasculate the mystical experience. Because what you don't want is people having their own access to the divine. So if people are taking a divine and then having their own personal acting, they don't need you. The whole point of organized religion is to mediate the divine. They are the intermediaries between you and God. That's where organized religion works. So it must always, and I think it happened in Hinduism with Soma.
We were looking at the fly agaric mushroom, at which Gordon Wasson believed was the Soma. But at any rate, whatever Soma is, and I don't believe it's the Muskimo, I really don't. I believe it's more like psilocybin, or Steve Hager has even said it's cannabis. If you read about it, it's like obviously cannabis. So at any rate, it was some kind of psychedelic, and it was a way for them to basically make contact with the divine.
The ninth mandala of the Rig Veda is entirely devoted to singing the praises of Soma, and yet we do not know what Soma is or was. R. Gordon Wasson spent a considerable portion of his life researching this problem and reached the conclusion that Soma was Amanita muscaria, a mushroom that is symbiotic to pine and birch trees throughout much of the North Temperate Zone. However, scholars have cast doubt on his identification of Soma.
It's quite possible that there were several different psychoactive plants used in.
Итак, господа, ставшее традиционное остановление смартфона. Но мы решили, что так дано судьбой, что были еще и мои комментарии, да? Итак, мы услышали там много хороших вещей. Например, упоминался Иисус Христос, что Он тоже как бы был шаманом. И это правильно. Самое интересное, что мы все шаманы. Вот абсолютно мы все шаманы, все. Но не осознаем это все. Вот. Еще более интересно то, что нужно вот этот опыт превращать в духовную практику и быть самим Богом, как бы. Ну, по большому счету, надо каждому из нас иметь свою религию, как бы, да. Вот. Вот это надо. Конечно, мы должны освоить шаманский опыт, шаманские практики. Они очень здоровые, как ни странно. Наверное, потому что там было все честно. Кто дает тепло? Солнце, значит, он Бог. Откуда идет пища, там, влага? От дождя. Значит, он Бог. Дождь Бог, солнце Бог. То есть эти вещи хорошие. Они как бы почестнее, как бы, да. Они, конечно, хорошо говорят, эти ученые. Мне, например, нравится. Я говорю, что это самая крутая передача в мире. Может, есть покруче, но здесь как-то тоже все честно. Они не спорят, выступают сами, выдают информацию высокого уровня, все такое, о шаманизме, о всяких там психоделиках, все такое. Вот. Конечно же, каждый из нас найдет свой путь духовного движения, духовного развития. И наша религия с названием Боги, Gods, Le Dio, Dumnezei, на 4 языках говорю Боги. Наша религия, конечно, будет впитывать все самые хорошие традиции в мире. И шаманские, и просто целительские, и парапсихологические, религиозные, и всякие. И йога, и православие тоже есть у них там хорошие, и католичество. Ну, короче, все. И буддизм, и ислам, суфизм, там, даосизм, конфуцианство, их много, синтоизм. Мы все это будем. Каждый из вас будет, потому что вы уже поняли, что я вам ничего особо не навязываю, ничего особо не хочу. Я как бы такой самый демократический в мире духовный лидер, да? Вот. Поезд идет. Кишинев, Москва. 18 вагонов. 18 вагонов идут до Москвы. Вот он. «18 вагонов кармических людей, потому что у них карма такая, работать в Москве. Они, как правило, работают в России, но большинство в Москве. Ну ладно. Посмотрели на поезд. Продолжается наша редкость.